So I thought we would read some Deleuze together. This is from the chapter called Repetition for Itself. It's chapter 2 from this book, Difference in Repetition. This will help, I think, elucidate some of what I was talking about in my video about the fourfold, and will help elucidate the diagram I drew of this sort of four-way crucifixion where we're pulled in these four directions, two into the future and two into the past. The directions of the past being in terms of micro and macrocosm, and the future in terms of the cosmopolitical and the psycho-spiritual, or the public and the private. And ultimately these two directions on each side of time, past and future, will reunite. They're not actually distinct. They are sort of abstractly distinguishable, and it's the tension created through that act of distinguishing these that gives rise to our consciousness of the present moment as a drama, a tragedy, and a comedy, a kind of it's an existence that is full of passion and suffering and constant death and rebirth. It's an ongoing rebirth, process of rebirth, you could say, or of karmic inheritance and creative advance. So, if you want any of that to make sense, go watch my prior two or three videos actually. But I also spoke of this fourfold in terms of Heidegger's fourfold: the gods, mortals or humans, earth, and sky. And I think Deleuze kind of, in what I'm going to read here, plays on this distinction. So here, this is from page 79. Although it is originary, the first synthesis of time, that is, the passive synthesis of time, which my diagram is an attempt to articulate, the first synthesis of time is no less intra-temporal. It constitutes time as a present, but a present which passes. Time does not escape the present, but the present does not stop moving by leaps and bounds which encroach upon one another. This is the paradox of the present. To constitute time while passing in the time constituted. We cannot avoid the necessary conclusion that there must be another time in which the first synthesis of time can occur. This refers us to a second synthesis. By insisting upon the finitude of contraction, we have shown the effect. We have by no means shown why the present passes, or what prevents it from being coextensive with time. In other words, the passive synthesis, the first passive synthesis of time through the power of imagination, is passive because it's unconscious, right? It's not deliberative. It's not consciously chosen in an active way. It's the unconscious condition that allows for these sort of conscious acts of representation to take place after the fact. In describing this process of the primary or the first synthesis of time as contractile, as a contractive power, Deleuze is saying that this is a description but not really an explanation. It doesn't account for how imagination is able to bind the past in its macro and microcosmic elements into the habits out of which the present moment, the living present, is built. So he's going to try to give more of an explanation now. As to why, for example, this present moment isn't coextensive with time, because clearly there is a past of things which have already happened, and a future of what will be past but is not yet past. And we don't experience all of that at once. We experience it in a sort of momentary way, this pulsation, this rhythmic passage, sort of atomic or epical theory of time, as Whitehead described it. So why is that? Deleuze continues here. The first synthesis of time, that of habit, is truly the foundation of time, but we must distinguish the foundation from the ground. The foundation concerns the soil, the earth. It shows how something is established upon this soil, how it occupies and possesses it, whereas the ground comes rather from the sky. It goes from the summit to the foundations, and measures the possessor and the soil against one another according to a title of ownership. Habit is the foundation of time, the moving soil occupied by the passing present. The claim of the present is precisely that it passes. However, it is what causes the present to pass, that to which the present and habit belong, which must be considered the ground of time. So in other words, the difference between ground and foundation for Deleuze here is that of cause and effect. The ground of time is the cause of the foundation of time, that foundation being habit. So he's asking, what is the foundation, or rather, what is the ground for habit? If habit is the foundation of time, if habit is the effect of that process which constitutes time, then what is the causal aspect of that process? And he's saying it's the sky, rather than the soil or the earth. He goes on, it is memory that grounds time. We have seen how memory, as a derived active synthesis, depended upon habit. In effect, everything depends upon a foundation. But this does not tell us what constitutes memory. At the moment when it grounds itself upon habit, memory must be grounded by another passive synthesis distinct from that of habit. So, memory must have its own form of synthesis. Sorry, I have to plug my phone in before it dies. Let's see. So, Deleuze continues. The passive synthesis of habit, in turn, refers to this more profound passive synthesis of memory. Habitus and mnemosine, the alliance of the sky and the ground. Habit is the originary synthesis of time, which constitutes the life of the passing present. Memory is the fundamental synthesis of time, which constitutes the being of the past, that which causes the present to pass. So here now Deleuze is offered with this second passive synthesis of memory, the causal element underlying the effect of this perpetual learning process of habituation. At first sight, it is as if the past were trapped between two presents, the one which it has been, and the one in relation to which it is past. The past is not the former present itself, but the element in which we focus upon the latter. Particularity, therefore, now belongs to that on which we focus. Particularity, therefore, now belongs to that on which we focus. In other words, to that which has been. Whereas the past itself, the was, is by nature general. So this is the micro and the macrocosmic that I was talking about. In Deleuze's terms, it's the particular and the general. It's the difference between what we focus on in what has been and what was in general without our need to focus on anything in particular. The past in general is the element in which each former present is focused upon in particular and as particular. In accordance with Husserlian terminology, Edmund Husserl's phenomenology, we must distinguish between retention and reproduction. However, what we earlier called the retention of habit was the state of successive instants contracted in a present, and a present present of a certain duration. These instants formed a particularity. In other words, an immediate past naturally belongs to the present present, while the present itself, which remains open to the future in the form of expectation, constitutes the general. By contrast, from the point of view of the reproduction involved in memory, it is the past, understood as the mediation of presence, which becomes general, while the present as well as former, the present present, becomes particular. To the degree to which the past in general is the element in which each former present preserves itself and may be focused upon, the former present finds itself represented in the present one. The limits of this representation, or reproduction, are in fact determined by the variable relations of resemblance and contiguity known as forms of association. In order to be represented, the former present must resemble the present present, and must be broken up into partially simultaneous presents with very different durations, which are then contiguous with one another and, even at the limit, contiguous with the present present. The great strength of associationism lies in having founded a whole theory of artificial science on these relations of association. So associationism is sort of that empiricist concept that was developed, I guess, initially by Hume, David Hume, who talked about how we form ideas of things by sort of averaging or collecting cases of these things as we experience or perceive them in the sensory world with one of our known senses. So I see one pillow as a child, and I hear my parents using the word pillow when they point at it and when they describe it in its absence, and eventually I come to associate the various pillows which I perceive with this word pillow, and all sorts of interesting connections begin to form due to the contiguity, the way that the word is used in conjunction with or next to the physical appearance, or the at least intention in the physical appearance and the language used by other people I'm in conversation with. And through the co-presence of this word and various perceptions of pillows, an idea of pillow forms in my mind. This is associationism. And Deleuze is saying that this is a sort of secondary product of representational activity that is at least partially conscious, and it's deliberative. It's what the ego engages with. But for Deleuze, this is sort of the surface of the realm of thought and experience. And deeper than this representational level is the level of repetition, which is always different. It's non-identical repetition. And he's describing this as a passive synthesis of time accomplished by a form of imagination which is below the threshold of consciousness, but that philosophers and artists and scientists, each in their own way, can tap into and be in relationship with, not in an entirely conscious way. I mean, it ends up transforming the ego doing representing, the sort of common sense identities that we're all taught to have in the world of opinion and everyday appearance. The philosopher and the artist and the scientist, according to Deleuze, reach a deeper substratum at the level where we no longer simply represent what's there, but we participate in the creative process that gives rise to what appears in the first place. So it's no longer that there's just simply a mind that we are ready-made, observing and marking out the sort of joints and categorical differences between various objects in a ready-made environment. Deleuze wants to get us below that threshold level of representational, dualistic, observer-observed consciousness to this imaginal plane, what he calls the plane of imminence, or the image of thought. And he wants us to think the conditions not of possible experience, as Kant did, but of actual experience. He wants us to tap into that substratum where mind and nature, or nous in physis in the Greek, are constantly weaving themselves together into the sensory and perceptual and cognitive landscape upon which we emerge and come to find ourselves. He wants us to dive into that chaos underlying the order of and the coherence of the representational plane. Although I've said a lot already, and I think I'll leave it at that. I hope that this, I've just started reading Deleuze only a few weeks ago, and I've kind of been infected by his way of thinking, and certainly Difference and Repetition is easier to follow than his later books with Felix Guattari, the Capitalism and Schizophrenia volumes. But even here in Difference and Repetition, Deleuze will write of schizophrenia as an important, as philosophically important. And he will write later with Guattari of schizophilosophy, in the way that we really do need to dissolve this notion of the ego that the Enlightenment has created. The ego, or really before the Enlightenment, it was created by Descartes, I suppose. The seed was planted by Descartes with his cogito. But this cogito, this rational thinking self separate from an emoting physical body and external world, mechanical external world, it's an interesting habit, but nothing more. It's not metaphysically basic, and to do philosophy really requires overcoming that sense of being a rationally self-possessed ego. And to the extent that institutionalized psychology and psychiatry try to habituate us to that mode of egoic consciousness, they will label anything deviant from that mode schizophrenic, or disordered, or sick, right? In the same way that priests in an earlier age would have referred to sinners, or those possessed by demons. So, yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope that there are some Deleuzians out there who will help me understand him better, because again, this is new territory for me. So yeah, thanks for listening.